You're listening to the Culips English podcast. To download the study guide for this episode, which includes the transcript, detailed vocabulary explanations, real-world examples, and a quiz, visit our website, culips.com. CULIPS.com. Hey everybody, my name is Andrew.
And my name is Morag.
And you're listening to Culips. Hey Morag.
Hey Andrew, what's up?
Not too much. How about you? What's new?
I'm doing really well, but I have a new morning hobby that's kind of taking up a lot of my time.
A morning hobby. I'm intrigued. Is it meditation or yoga or exercise?
No.
Or something like that?
No, it's just really particular coffee. So
really particular
yeah,
coffee. Okay.
So I started dating someone who is really, really into like naturally processed, expensive coffees, and they're amazing. But they're oh my god, sometimes they can just taste like fruit, and they're wonderful to drink black, and oh my gosh, it's like good wine or something. But the downside is that the beans are expensive, and if you make them wrong, they can taste awful.
It's high stakes coffee.
Very little margin for error. So you have to do things like, well, say this morning, I was like, hey, Andrew, I really want to make a coffee. I need like 10, 15 minutes because you need to go weigh out the beans to a 2 decimal accuracy and then like grind them perfectly and then do the whole setup, make sure that you have a correct temperature of water, and then there's like a timed pouring thing going on, and then you can maybe drink your coffee.
So are you pouring the water over the beans with like a filter and such?
Yeah, doing filter.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
And where do the beans come from?
These ones are Colombian, I believe. But I'd say Ethiopia is great. Kenya is great. Yeah.
Wow.
I'm still just like kind of getting into it. But warning to everyone. Once you start drinking coffee like this, it's really hard to go back.
I was recently in Tokyo for just one day when I was on a layover, and I had a couple of hours, so I went into the city and I found a shop that specialized in coffee gadgets, and I totally geeked out and wanted to buy everything, like all the little gizmos and filters and pouring pots and you name it, they had it there. So I can see how this hobby can get quite involved, I think.
Interestingly enough, pretty much all of the main pots and your pouring devices and this kind of stuff in your grinders, almost all of that comes from Japan.
Right. Yeah. Big coffee culture over there. Except surprisingly, sometimes hard to find a cafe. Weirdly enough.
This is the weird thing that I've heard. It's everything comes from there. Like all of the like the big, like the Chemex and all of the pour over stuff and all the grinders. But yeah, I've heard that it's really actually difficult to find this type of coffee there. Indeed.
Well, Morag, I hope that your new hobby goes well and you don't spend too much money on it.
Well, just a couple $100. It's fine,
Anyway, we're going to change the subject completely for this Chatterbox episode. For all of our listeners that don't know, Chatterbox is a series where we have a totally natural conversation about a topic that we think is interesting, and we let everyone listen in. And the idea is that you can really get a sense for how native speakers talk about a specific topic in English. And today, our topic is NIMBYism. But just before we get started talking about NIMBYism, I want to let everyone know that we do have a study guide available for this episode on our website. It contains a lot of great things that are designed to help you take your English to the next level, really, including a transcript, detailed vocabulary explanations and examples. There's a quiz. There are prompts that you can use for writing practice or speaking practice. Like I said, we are really proud of this product and we think you will like it too. And if you want to check it out, just visit our website, qlips.com, to give it a download. So Morag, I think we should start by defining NIMBYism. This is a very interesting turn of phrase, NIMBYism. And actually, you asked me what it meant at the start of the episode.
I did.
Yeah. So, do you remember?
So it is an acronym that stands for Not in My Backyard-ism.
Right, not in my backyard. And the suffix ism means a belief or an ideology, right? You can think of communism or Buddhism. Okay, so this is NIMBYism. So the belief that something should be not in my backyard. And here, backyard really doesn't mean like the area behind your house. It means more like in your community, right?
Yeah, your community, your general area within a city, your neighborhood.
And so people that buy into the idea of NIMBYism or not in my backyard-ism are opposed to something being built in their neighborhood. And actually, when I looked on Wikipedia, there was a massive list of things that people get opposed to. And I'm going to list a lot of them off here really quickly. Okay, so housing development, bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure, skyscrapers, homeless shelters, oil wells, chemical plants, industrial parks, military bases, fracking, wind turbines, desalination plants, landfill sites, incinerators, power plants, quarries, prisons, pubs, adult entertainment clubs, concert venues, firearms dealers, mobile phone masts, electricity pylons, abortion clinics, children's homes, nursing homes, youth hostels, sports stadiums, shopping malls, retail parks, railways, roads, airports, seaports, nuclear waste repositories, storage for weapons of mass destruction, cannabis dispensaries, recreational cannabis shops, and the accommodation of persons applying for asylum, refugees of war, and displaced persons. Whew. I hope you caught all that.
Yeah. I would like to actually add one to that list, which is one that I'm more personally familiar with, which is safe injection sites.
Safe injection sites. That is a good Canadian example, I think.
It's a good Western Canadian example. That happened in Vancouver specifically. There's a large drug problem, and people wanted people to be safer, even if they're addicted to intravenous drugs, and they want them to be safer because they're going to do it anyway, and also not be doing it on the streets for various reasons. So everyone was totally for places, buildings, areas where people could inject drugs safely, but no one wanted to have that location be anywhere near their own home. So that is exactly NIMBYism.
Exactly. So the residents of that neighborhood where the safe injection site was proposed to be built, they were like, yeah, this is a great idea. We can help people who suffer from drug addiction. However, we don't really want it built in our neighborhood. Go build it somewhere else, because the negative consequences that could possibly arise from building it in their neighborhood scared them and concerned them. So they thought it's a good idea, but not in my backyard. Please and thank you.
Exactly. Well, it's also like, man, we need an airport. Oh God, I don't want to live next to the airport. you know?
Right.
Like,
you don't want planes flying over your house every 5 minutes.
Yeah, but you would love an airport.
So, Morag, the reason that I thought we'd talk about NIMBYism here is because there is a great example of it that just played out in my hometown of Kelowna, British Columbia. There was a big protest in front of City Hall because of this issue, and it was a protest by senior citizens, which is interesting because it's a demographic that you don't really see out on the street with signs marching around City Hall protesting, right? But
I don't think I've ever seen that. That's, yeah.
There was probably about 50 people in front of City Hall, and they were protesting because in a neighborhood that a lot of senior citizens, and a senior citizen is a person that's 65 years or older, in a neighborhood where a lot of senior citizens live, the city would like to build a housing shelter for people who are homeless or at risk of being homeless. And the main problem that the senior citizens have an issue with is that the housing complex will be a wet facility. And this means that drugs and alcohol aren't banned, so that they would be allowed to bring these substances into their housing unit. And what the seniors fear is that this will cause an increase of potentially dangerous criminals in the neighborhood, drug dealers or overdoses or drug paraphernalia in the neighborhood. So this was the issue, which I can sympathize with. I guess I can see both sides of the story. But Morag, I actually have a little audio clip here that I wanted to play for our listeners of one of the protesters. So let's take a listen to him now.
It's going to be a wet facility in a seniors-oriented neighborhood, and our neighbors are already scared. I live in a co-op society, which is going to be right beside it, and I don't agree with having it as a wet facility and only having 2 security 24 hours. That's not enough. It's going to harm the neighborhood. People are upset about it, and we just want to bring out the word that this was jammed down our throats, more or less.
Okay, Morag, so that man was concerned because he thinks this project is just being jammed down the throats of the senior citizens. That's the quote that he said. This is being jammed down our throats. Could you let our listeners know what this expression means, to jam something down someone's throat?
Well, to jam something down anyone's throat or someone's throat is to force them to deal with something or a situation that they do not approve of. So it is without their consent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, without their consent, without their consultation, just doing it against their will. That it's being forced upon them.
I guess it's like, guess what? You're eating this. We're not talking about it anymore.
Right.
This is kind of the strange mental image that I have, at least.
Totally. I think of maybe a prisoner that's being force-fed or something like that. It's kind of a gross image, but anyways, it is what it is.
Yeah, it is a saying in English, so there we go. Yeah.
So a lot of these protesters outside of City Hall were carrying signs that said, "Right project, wrong place." And I think this summarizes NIMBYism in a nutshell. They realize that homelessness is a problem, drug addiction is a problem. They want to have this problem eliminated, but they're not willing to sacrifice their neighborhood to solve the problem.
The thing that really gets me about this stuff is that it's a perceived sacrifice. It's also one of those things where I think that it displays an incredible lack of empathy, because it's like, what are you giving up potentially, and what have the people who are set to benefit from this, how much has been taken from them?
I definitely understand that point of view. And yeah, absolutely, this is a vulnerable community that you want to help. At the same time, I think these seniors have lived in Kelowna for a long time, and they've seen the government screw up many projects. And so they think if this is their track record of not carrying out projects very well, then they might screw up in our neighborhood too. And if they do, the consequences could be big. One of the things that the seniors were saying as well was that they're worried about their property value declining. And if their property value declines, that's kind of their legacy. They were planning, on passing these properties down to their children once they move on into the next world. And so it's a complicated issue. I don't really know how to feel about it.
I have pretty strong socialist leanings.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, people who have a lot of things would like to keep on having a lot of things, which means that people who have nothing can continue to have nothing. Mm-hmm. Share the things.
Yeah. I think that might be an ideal solution in my view as well, but
share the stuff. But it is difficult, and it's one of those things where it's very natural if you have been in a place for some time, or you have even struggled to attain something for yourself. When that's threatened, you feel like it's a loss, even if you would agree that the basis behind what's happening is good. People don't, in many areas of life, people don't really like change, especially when they're comfortable.
Totally.
And that's a very natural and human and not evil or mean thing, cruel thing to feel. It's just, I personally think it's something that should be fought against, that level of comfort. But it's also very much something up for discussion or debate.
Morag, you mentioned just before we started recording that you got into an argument with your mother over NIMBYism. Do you care to talk about that briefly?
Sure. So the last time I was out visiting my mom, we went on like a nice long walk and we were chatting about things, and one of them was in Victoria. There have been a lot of issues in the last few years with homeless people not being able to camp in public parks and spaces. So they used to be able to camp in a lot of different parks, but the homeless population has been growing a lot, and there are now more people, and they were shut out of many of the spaces that they used to camp overnight in.
Right.
So there's a group of people, and they're trying to find a space where they can camp and live. But there are some problems associated with them being in a particular space for any length of time, notably more like drug paraphernalia and crime rates going up around there. Not usually with the people living there, but because like people coming in and like trying to sell to people who live in these spaces and that kind of thing.
Right.
Anyway, so you have this whole thing, and this group of people were going all around and actually trying to like pay to be able to camp in a space, go into provincial parks and camp in spaces that are like outside of regular camping grounds and stuff, but they were being removed from everywhere, even if they had the funds to pay for a spot. This just seems completely ridiculous to me. And what my mother said was that she feels extremely bad for these people and believes that they should absolutely have outreach in homes and help, but that Victoria is a very expensive city and maybe they should go somewhere else. Because it's unreasonable to think that you can live here if you don't have enough money.
Right. And one of the reasons that Victoria actually has a higher homeless population is because the weather is mild. So
Exactly.
it attracts people that don't want to live in a freezing cold city during the winter. You can imagine if you're homeless, that could be a life or death situation, really.
It is literally a life or death situation if you're somewhere like, well, basically anywhere other than certain parts of BC. So there really isn't anywhere else.
Right.
It's also, you really can't go anywhere else. It's also, if you're even low income, it can be very, very difficult to move. It could be very expensive to move.
Sure.
And you need to get a new job and all this stuff, and sometimes you don't have enough money to move to somewhere else that's cheaper. So we got into a long argument because I thought that while true that it's not feasible to change the housing economy in a place because you think that there's a group of people that should be accommodated, it's also completely unreasonable to say that this whole patch of the world is off limits just because you don't have enough money, especially if it's one of the only places that you can be to survive.
Yeah, it's interesting that both of the examples that we brought up about NIMBYism, they're both surrounding homelessness, right? And we recently did a Culips episode about this topic. It's a really big issue in Canada these days, homelessness, and how we can tackle this problem.
I think especially in the areas that we're from in BC, like lower BC, it's a really, really large issue. Although I definitely heard of people opposing the kind of industrial production that you mentioned earlier, as it's similarly, you want generally to be able to have something, have a new service, have energy, but you don't want to live right next to something that's belting smoke.
Totally. And I guess the pipeline in Canada might be another example of NIMBYism too, but perhaps we can save talking about the oil pipelines in Canada for another episode, because that's another huge
that's a big one.
topic.
Yeah.
Anyways, we'll leave it at that for today, I think. But thank you for listening, everyone. And I'm sure there are some examples of NIMBYism where you live as well, and perhaps they are specialized to the issues that you encounter in your country. So I would love it if you could send us an email and share some of the examples of NIMBYism that you see around you. The place you want to send your email is our inbox. The address is contact@culips.com. Once again, our website is culips.com, and that's the place where you can get the study guide for this episode. And finally, we are on social media as well: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, everywhere. So just search for the Culips English Podcast and you will be sure to find us. We'll be back soon with another new episode, and we'll talk to you then. Bye, everyone.
Goodbye.